She believed she had married the man of her dreams, but just days into their lavish honeymoon in paradise, Sarah's life was cut short in an unimaginable tragedy. Behind the closed doors of their secluded villa, a horrifying truth was exposed. The seemingly perfect husband was concealing a deadly secret. This is the shocking tale of love, betrayal, and murder in the heart of paradise. David and Sarah Miller seemed to have it all. Their whirlwind romance had captured the hearts of everyone around them, with friends and family often commenting on how perfect they were together. Sarah, a dedicated teacher with a radiant smile, had met David, a charismatic entrepreneur, at a charity event just 2 years prior. From that moment on, their connection was instant and magnetic. David was attentive, showering Sarah with thoughtful gestures and extravagant surprises that made her feel like the center of his world. Their love story seemed like something out of a romance novel, and when David proposed during a candlelit dinner in Paris, Sarah said yes without hesitation. Their wedding was the culmination of their fairy tale, a grand celebration filled with laughter, heartfelt speeches, and promises of forever. To begin their married life, the couple planned an opulent honeymoon in Fiji, a destination they had always dreamed of visiting. Nestled in a private villa surrounded by crystal clear waters and lush greenery, they were meant to spend their days basking in the beauty of paradise and the joy of their new union. Social media posts showed them holding hands on the beach, sharing cocktails by the pool, and smiling against the backdrop of mesmerizing sunsets. To the outside world, their happiness seemed unshakable. But behind the glossy photos and idyllic setting, the cracks in their relationship began to show. Friends later revealed that the couple had been facing underlying issues in the months leading up to the wedding. Sarah had confided in her closest friend that David's charming demeanor often masked a controlling side. He would question her choices, dismiss her opinions, and occasionally lash out over trivial matters. Sarah brushed it off as pre-wedding stress, convincing herself that everything would change once they were married. But those issues followed them to Fiji, magnified by the isolation of their private getaway. In the first few days of their honeymoon, staff members at the resort noticed the couple's interactions were not as harmonious as they appeared in public. While David seemed jovial and attentive during excursions or dinners, Sarah often looked tense and withdrawn when they were alone. A waitress recalled Sarah nervously fiddling with her ring during a meal, her eyes cast downward as David spoke sharply to her about something seemingly insignificant. Though the staff dismissed it as a minor disagreement, Sarah's unease was undeniable. On the third night, guests in neighboring villas reported hearing raised voices from David and Sarah's suite. The argument didn't last long, and it was followed by an unsettling silence. The next morning, the couple appeared at breakfast as though nothing had happened, but Sarah's usually vibrant energy seemed muted. By the fourth day, Sarah's social media activity abruptly ceased. What was meant to be a trip filled with joy and adventure now carried an undercurrent of tension that no one could fully explain at the time. As the days unfolded, the fairy tale Sarah and David had carefully constructed began to unravel, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock everyone who had ever believed in their love story. The resort was a tropical haven designed to offer newlyweds the ultimate experience of luxury and privacy. For Sarah, however, the isolation quickly became suffocating. The picturesque views of the turquoise ocean and the sounds of rustling palm trees couldn't drown out the growing tension in her marriage. What had seemed like paradise began to feel like a gilded cage. David's behavior, which had always been a point of concern, became more erratic as the honeymoon progressed. Initially attentive and charming, he shifted between brief moments of affection and bursts of cold, controlling anger. Sarah found herself increasingly walking on eggshells, avoiding topics she knew might provoke him. On one occasion, a disagreement over something as trivial as a snorkeling excursion escalated into a heated exchange. David wanted to change their itinerary at the last minute, dismissing Sarah's preference to stick to their planned activities. While it seemed minor, the way he reacted, shouting and accusing her of being ungrateful, left Sarah shaken. That night, she stayed quiet, hoping her compliance would restore peace. Despite her attempts to salvage the trip, Sarah confided in a housekeeper about her growing unease. During a casual conversation while the villa was being cleaned, Sarah mentioned that things between her and David weren't going as smoothly as she had hoped. The housekeeper later recalled that Sarah appeared nervous and hesitant, as if she were holding back more than she was saying. Her words were a cry for help disguised as small talk. But at the time, it didn't seem serious enough to raise alarms. David's behavior wasn't confined to the privacy of their villa. At dinner one evening, he snapped at Sarah when she hesitated over a menu choice, loudly criticizing her for being indecisive. Though the moment passed quickly and he tried to laugh it off, the tension lingered. Other diners at nearby tables exchanged glances, uncomfortable but unsure of what they had witnessed. Sarah, ever the peacemaker, tried to downplay the incident by apologizing and redirecting the conversation, but her forced smile betrayed her true feelings. The turning point came on their fourth night at the resort. A loud argument erupted in their villa, loud enough for guests in neighboring rooms to hear muffled shouting and the sound of something heavy being thrown. According to one witness, the argument lasted for several minutes before abruptly stopping. The unsettling silence that followed made it clear that whatever had transpired wasn't a simple disagreement. When the staff checked in the next morning, David insisted everything was fine, though his demeanor was strangely calm and detached. Sarah's social media posts, which had previously chronicled every moment of their trip, abruptly stopped that same night. This sudden silence was out of character for her, as she had always loved sharing her adventures with friends and family. It was as if she had vanished from the vibrant, joyful life she had always presented to the world. To those who knew her, this was the first ominous sign that something was terribly wrong. What seemed like an ordinary night in paradise was, in reality, the beginning of a nightmare no one could have anticipated. The next morning, the serene beauty of the resort was shattered by a horrifying discovery. A housekeeper entered David and Sarah's villa for the routine cleaning, only to find Sarah's lifeless body sprawled on the floor near the bed. Her face was bruised, and blood pooled around her head, staining the pristine white sheets and carpet. The staff member screamed, alerting security, who quickly arrived and sealed off the area. David, sitting on the patio with a cup of coffee in hand, appeared unnervingly calm as resort staff tried to make sense of the gruesome scene. When questioned, David claimed that Sarah had fallen during the night, hitting her head on the edge of the bed. He insisted it was a tragic accident, but his demeanor raised immediate suspicions. Police arrived swiftly, transforming the idyllic resort into the site of a crime investigation. David repeated his story to the officers, maintaining that Sarah's death was a result of a simple fall. However, forensic evidence began to tell a different story. Sarah's injuries were inconsistent with a mere accident. The blunt force trauma to her skull suggested a deliberate, violent impact, not a stumble. Bruises on her arms and wrists hinted at a struggle, further contradicting David's account. The scene inside the villa was chaotic. Overturned furniture, a shattered glass on the floor, and a deep dent in the headboard of the bed. These details painted a chilling picture of a violent altercation rather than an accidental fall. As the investigation progressed, more inconsistencies in David's story began to emerge. His initial claim that he had been asleep during Sarah's supposed fall was contradicted by surveillance footage from the resort. The cameras captured David pacing back and forth outside the villa in the early hours of the morning, long before the body was discovered. His nervous pacing and repeated glances over his shoulder suggested he was deeply agitated. These actions raised questions about what exactly had happened inside the villa that night. Autopsy results further undermined David's version of events. The medical examiner determined that Sarah's injuries were consistent with multiple blows to the head, not a single accidental impact. Defensive wounds on her hands and forearms indicated she had tried to protect herself during the attack. The findings were damning, making it increasingly clear that Sarah's death was not an accident, but the result of a brutal assault. Meanwhile, David's behavior only deepened the suspicion surrounding him. While most grieving spouses are overcome with shock or sorrow, David appeared strangely detached. He made no attempt to contact Sarah's family, and when asked about funeral arrangements, he seemed more preoccupied with how the incident might affect his reputation. Witnesses described him as cold and calculating, showing little emotion even when confronted with the evidence of Sarah's violent death. As news of the incident spread, the story quickly garnered international attention. What had begun as a romantic honeymoon in paradise had turned into a chilling tale of love, betrayal, and murder. The dreamlike setting of Fiji became the backdrop for a nightmare that no one could have foreseen, and David found himself at the center of a murder investigation that would soon uncover even darker truths about his past and his relationship with Sarah. As investigators delved deeper into the events leading up to Sarah's death, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Friends and family members were interviewed, revealing a side of David that had been carefully hidden beneath his charming exterior. Sarah's best friend, Melissa, described how Sarah had expressed growing concerns about David's temper in the months leading up to their wedding. She shared text messages in which Sarah confided that David had become increasingly controlling, dictating how she dressed, whom she spoke to, and even monitoring her social media accounts. Sarah had written that she hoped the honeymoon would bring them closer, offering a fresh start for their marriage. Tragically, it did the opposite. Police also uncovered a history of volatile behavior from David. While there were no previous criminal charges, several ex-girlfriends came forward to share their own unsettling experiences. They described a man who could be charming and generous one moment, but explosive and manipulative the next. One ex revealed that she had ended their relationship after an argument escalated into physical violence, though she never reported it to the authorities. These accounts painted a damning portrait of David as a man with a history of controlling and abusive tendencies. Back at the resort, evidence from the villa further solidified the case against David. Forensic experts meticulously analyzed the crime scene, piecing together the final moments of Sarah's life. Blood spatter patterns on the walls and bed frame indicated multiple blows, contradicting David's claim of a single accidental fall. The shattered glass found near the bedside was determined to have been part of a violent struggle. Additionally, David's fingerprints were discovered on the headboard where the fatal impact occurred, suggesting he had forcefully struck Sarah against it. Witnesses at the resort provided further damning testimony. Neighbors staying in the adjacent villa reported hearing loud arguments on multiple nights during the couple's stay. On the night of Sarah's death, they distinctly recalled hearing raised voices, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the wall. One guest even claimed to have heard a woman's muffled cries before the argument abruptly stopped. These accounts painted a chilling picture of the escalating tension between the couple and the tragic end that followed. David's behavior in the aftermath of Sarah's death only added to the growing suspicion. Surveillance footage showed him pacing outside the villa in the early hours of the morning, repeatedly looking over his shoulder as though he were trying to compose himself. When interviewed by police, his responses were evasive and inconsistent. He alternated between expressing shock at Sarah's death and insisting he had done everything he could to save her, even though there was no evidence of him attempting CPR or calling for help. Investigators also discovered that David had taken out a significant life insurance policy on Sarah just weeks before their wedding, further fueling speculation about his motives. Combined with his controlling tendencies, the forensic evidence, and witness testimonies, the case against David grew stronger by the day. What had initially been presented as a tragic accident was now unmistakably a brutal act of violence, and the image of the perfect couple shattered under the weight of a dark and horrifying truth. The trial of David Miller became an international spectacle, with media outlets dubbing it the honeymoon murder case. Courtrooms were packed as prosecutors laid out a chilling case against the man once seen as a devoted husband. David maintained his innocence, claiming Sarah's death was a tragic accident and that the media had unfairly vilified him. But the evidence told a story he could no longer deny. Prosecutors painted a picture of a controlling and abusive man who lashed out in a fit of rage, leading to Sarah's untimely death. They presented forensic evidence, including the blood spatter analysis and autopsy findings, which revealed Sarah had suffered multiple blunt force injuries inconsistent with David's claims. The defensive wounds on her arms spoke of her desperate fight to survive, while the shattered glass and overturned furniture testified to the violent struggle that had taken place. The life insurance policy David had taken out on Sarah became a focal point in the trial. Prosecutors argued that David's financial struggles had motivated the murder, highlighting his recent failed business ventures and mounting debt. Friends and family confirmed that David had been secretive about money matters, and the timing of the life insurance policy, just weeks before the wedding, seemed more than coincidental. Witnesses from the resort testified about the couple's escalating arguments during their stay, adding weight to the prosecution's narrative. One neighbor recounted hearing Sarah's muffled cries and the sound of something heavy being slammed against a wall the night she died. Resort staff described Sarah as visibly tense and withdrawn, a stark contrast to the joyful bride she had been just days earlier. Surveillance footage showing David pacing outside the villa after Sarah's death further undermined his credibility, portraying a man struggling to cover his tracks rather than mourning his wife. David's defense team argued that there was no concrete evidence of intent, and that the prosecution was building a circumstantial case based on assumptions. They claimed Sarah's death was a tragic accident that had been sensationalized by the media. However, their arguments were overshadowed by the overwhelming forensic and circumstantial evidence. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. David showed no visible reaction as the sentence was read, but the courtroom erupted with emotion. Sarah's family embraced one another, tears streaming down their faces as they finally received justice for their beloved daughter. David was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years, though many believed he deserved a harsher punishment. The aftermath of the case left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Sarah's friends and family established a foundation in her name to support victims of domestic violence, ensuring her story would not be forgotten. The resort where the murder occurred implemented new safety measures and staff training to identify signs of abuse among guests. For those who followed the case, the tragedy served as a grim reminder of how appearances can be deceiving. David and Sarah's seemingly perfect love story was a facade hiding a darker reality. In the end, Sarah's life was taken far too soon, but her story shed light on the warning signs of abuse, giving hope that others might be saved from a similar fate.